And we are live, maybe, hopefully. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Let's check to make sure everything is up and working properly. It looks like it is, hopefully. And let's check to make sure. Looks like everything's good on this side. And yeah, there we are. And yeah, there's the live chat. Everything's. I have PTSD after last week where everything just kind of crashed and burned. So there we go. Now we are working, and thank you again for coming in. We have a couple of things that we're going to be talking about today, which includes the potential for a nice little rainstorm. Yes, I know it's not a snowstorm. I'll explain why we're not going to be dealing with a snowstorm with the mall guys. I've been showing this in the premium side, and of course we're going to take your questions and all that good stuff as we move on through the evening. But first, let's take a look at some of the latest data here. We start off first with the Water Vapor Satellite picture, and the pattern that we have in place continues to remain a theme, and that is yet another strong upper level feature in the subtropical jet stream. It is phasing a little too early with our polar shortwave and riding on top of the southeast ridge and heading towards the eastern Great Lakes, which will lead to a warm front for tonight into tomorrow morning and a few scattered showers. The bulk of the lifting is all focused towards the eastern Great Lakes. I'm not expecting much in the way of rainfall, maybe an isolated quarter of an inch in eastern Pennsylvania. But as you can see with the latest data here, you can see the strongest divergence in diffluence and 700 millibar moisture transport is all heading towards the Ohio River Valley and towards the Great Lakes. And this ridge axis right here is going to be passing over this evening, providing tranquil weather conditions into tomorrow morning. And then the showers move through with the warm front later on in the morning. Not really expecting all that much in terms of rainfall. Taking a look at the latest radar, you can see here's our storm evolving here. We have plenty of storms, plenty of interaction, but unfortunately it's just not lining up the way we wanted for winter. I know that. We've kind of nailed that whole topic. But what about the polar vortex? Because I know that we've been getting a lot of talk about that on social media. Major stratospheric warming, disruption of the polar vortex. Yes, that is all true. Let's take a look at the data. If I could find it. Let's see here. Here we are. Okay, so here is the stratosphere at 10 millibars, and that is one heck of a stratospheric warming signal. It is clearly evolving here and disrupting the polar vortex and creating all sorts of havoc. But there is one issue. It's something that, unfortunately, a lot of people really should be keying on, but they're not mentioning it. So let's zoom out and take a look at what is happening here. Okay, so we have a major stratospheric warming event evolving here, and that's going to weaken and disrupt the polar vortex. The problem here, when we look at the evolution of the polar vortex, yeah, it's getting displaced. It's getting displaced towards Northern Europe and Asia. And the problem with that is the orientation of the polar vortex being displaced and weakened and disrupted leads to a westerly component over North America. This is why, even though we got the disruption, we got the major stratospheric warming event, it didn't set up correctly. This is another example of how everything in the long range, when we look at the long range pattern and look at what the potential is, we look at what is possible here, and a lot of it has panned out. The problem is that one feature after another is off by just a little bit. That's how we got where we are. Now, there's a lot of people focusing on the major stratospheric warming event, and this could lead to a colder weather pattern and snow, and people, some individuals online, on social media, who, quite frankly, I think should know better, have been posting a lot of stuff, and as a result, people have been asking me, hey, does this mean we're going to see a winter storm in late February or March? Here's the deal. Here's the truth. Yes, we are going to see disruption. Yes, we are seeing a signal in our tropical forcing. Where is it? Here it is. Of a colder regime setting up both in the European ensembles, that's the EPS, and in the CFS. So you see this and you say, hey, look, this could mean that in March we get a winter storm. Problem. Because of the orientation of the polar vortex, yes, you have everything kind of lining into place. This would probably lead to a displacement of the southeast ridge in the last week of February into March, the potential for a trough over eastern North America, and maybe even a polar, or dare I say, maybe even an Arctic air mass invading. Certainly a possibility. The problem is that this orientation, which, let's see here, right here, this orientation of the polar vortex on February 18th would mean that you don't have the support for a negative NAO pattern. Well, let's not just look at the European. How about the GFS? Because after all, a lot of people are using the GFS for this support in this conversation. Well, again, I would love to be wrong about this. But when I'm taking a look at this orientation here, okay, yes, you have a trough over the eastern United States as a potential here, but this setup here leads to transient cold air masses. So, yeah, I could see a cold air mass coming in March, and yeah, even near to slightly below normal temperatures for March. But it's very progressive. This pattern is very progressive. What I would need to see change, and what you should be looking for before you start chasing, going down the rabbit hole and start looking at CFS guidance and GFS guidance and whatever guidance. I even saw someone pull up the Brazilian guidance. I didn't know Brazil was doing their own guidance, but apparently they are. This feature needs to be here over the Hudson Bay, not over Russia. If it's over Russia, that means that you have a very progressive pattern over North America, and you have a near zonal pattern where you have all your blocking and slowing down of storms over locations like Eastern Europe, much of Russia, into Siberia, parts of China, but not us. And again, the goal here is to basically share reliable information, not blow up a bunch of smoke up your butt and pretend that we're going to be entering this pattern that just isn't happening. Now, does that mean we can't absolutely no way in heck see a winter storm in early March? I would be very foolish and very irresponsible to make that statement. Because, yes, it can happen if you get everything lines up just right. But our theme this winter, and most likely in early spring, has been anything but everything lining up just right. So while I will be keeping an eye on the potential scenarios here, I'm also going to be very frank with you. No, this is not it. We have parts of it. It's like we have parts of a great cake, but unfortunately the eggs are bad. Okay? So that's the best way I would describe it. We have plenty of parts. The flour looks good. We got milk. We got sugar. We got cream. The eggs are bad. And when you have bad eggs, everyone gets sick. So that is pretty much where we stand with the pattern overall. I see this being a very progressive pattern still. When I take a look at the ensemble guidance here, this is a pattern where, again, late February, you could start to make the case for a broad trough from the Rockies into the plains. But with this ridge axis here over the Caribbean, you basically end up with your storm tracks heading up towards the eastern Great Lakes. And again, there's no when you have below normal heights here over Greenland, that is the exact opposite of high latitude blocking in the North Atlantic. That is called a positive NAO, which means that your storm tracks can head up towards the eastern Great Lakes, and there's no resistance. There's no mechanism to cause a low pressure system to redevelop over the coastal waters. But in the meantime, we do have an interesting little feature marching across. Now, how did I know to begin with, as of last week, saying, this is probably a rainstorm or a mist. The first signal for me was the orientation of this trough. When you have a positively tilted trough like this, what you would need to have a significant shift to a negatively tilted trough and pulling in cold air, what you would need is a strong short wave here to dive into the back of this trough. And as we can see, as we progress through, the polar jet stream is not playing nice with the subtropical jet stream. So you end up with this very progressive pattern here, and you get this nice upper level low here. Vigorous, sure. Cold air loft, some, but not a lot of support for a lot of expansive cold air. So it's very localized, most likely over the Appalachians, maybe West Virginia, something of that nature, on the northwest side of this upper level low. But what this tells me is that I don't really have a lot of interaction with polar air masses. When we take a look at the 850 millibar anomalies here, you can see, again with the temperatures, your polar and Arctic air masses are all locked up here. And this part, this cold air part, is really associated with the strengthening of the 500 millibar low. Okay, it's crashing 500 millibar heights, which is manufacturing cold air. Notice as we move forward on Sunday into Sunday afternoon and evening, the air mass at 850 millibars is moderating. Why is that the case? Well, it's because the 500 millibar low reaches an apex in strength and then starts to weaken and push due east. So your ability to manufacture cold air is reduced and the air mass as a whole modifies. So by the time it gets to the northern mid-Atlantic, about 1 degree Celsius, which is basically 34 in rain. I know it's the worst type of rain. What I do see around Sunday night into Monday morning, if you're going to be coming home from the Super Bowl, which hopefully the Chiefs win. Sorry, Eagle fans, but hey, I gotta be true to my team. During that time period, let's say from 7 p.m. to midnight, there is pretty strong support for some very heavy rainfall, some pretty impressive lifting. Now, one thing I am going to be watching out for while this lifting is evolving here is the potential for some snow and sleet to mix in with this heavy rain, but the boundary layer temperatures at the surface are still going to be above freezing. I'm not really expecting much in the way of accumulation. But certainly some very heavy rainfall, maybe a little bit of mixing. But this whole feature is moving through so fast that we don't have enough time for cooling. Even if the 500 millibar low intensified rapidly in this scenario, it's moving so fast that we don't have enough time to cool the boundary layer, which 24 hours beforehand we're in the 50s and in some cases 60s. So again, it's difficult. Can you end up with a snow scenario after hitting 60 degrees the day before? Yes. But you need a slow-moving 500 millibar low and rapid cooling, or very strong cold air transport, which we don't have any of. So, as a result, we end up with this pattern where we get a nice heavy rainfall. Again, there's that snowfall over West Virginia and portions of Virginia, associated with our 500 millibar low. That low weakens, and so our surface low weakens, and we end up with about half an inch or maybe an inch and a half of rain on the Jersey Shore through Long Island. A heavy rainfall event for sure, some windy conditions on Sunday night into Monday morning, but this low pressure system will be moving quickly and out of the area. And then after that, we continue on with this progressive pattern, continuing on. And then I want to touch on this aspect here that's showing up in the guidance. Be very wary of this type of solution when you see this type of setup here. First of all, the stretching of the surface features here would suggest that there's some sort of convective feedback influences taking shape here, which may mean an error. But also, look at what it does with the cold air transport. Now, you have this stretching at 850 millibar low, which typically, as we get closer to the time period, means that this 850 millibar low is going to be displaced further east. But let's just say we have this stretching here. You see this whole pattern overall. this would delay your cold air transport. So this is likely questionable here, and it's very marginal. As we go forward, I would expect this feature to get cut off more here, kind of like what we're seeing now, and this moderating as we get closer to the time period, and this remaining pretty much just a cold rain rather than any type of snowfall. And also, 12 hours beforehand, we're in the 40s and 50s, and then 6 hours after, we're in the 40s and 50s. So your ground temperatures are likely to warm as well. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I know there's a lot of people that look at this and say, hey, what about this? What about that? But when you're at this point, you have to be realistic in what you're looking at and what the guidance is showing. So I know I don't want to be a Debbie Downer tonight, and I'm probably going to get a lot of people just turn off the chat based on that. But let's answer some questions, and we'll see where we're at, and then if anyone, and then we'll cover all the questions and see what people are thinking. So of course, we'll start the live chat first, and in the premium area. Okay, and we got the first one from Card here. So the 10 millibar polar vortex is basically just north of Sweden and Russia, and 70 millibars are stretched over Central Asia. Plenty of cold air. It's over Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Europe. Yes, exactly. If the polar vortex was actually on our side, we would be getting pummeled with snowstorms right now. But because the disruption and evolution ended up in Asia, we basically miss all of it. So far, so good. About an hour ago, YouTube down was trending. Apparently, Twitter is still having issues. Yeah, I have social media everywhere. It seems to be. Facebook was having issues earlier on. YouTube, Twitter now. It's been crazy. So fingers crossed here. At least I know it's not me or whatever I'm doing with the website or whatnot. It's just social media overall. Vortex stretched perfectly in the wrong direction. Exactly. This year, very reminiscent of the year where we got the big split of the vortex right into China. That'd be 2006. 2006, I remember that year specifically because it was one of the first years where in my career, I was working for another weather company, and I had the great pleasure of forecasting the long-range pattern. And one of the guys there was very much into into the polar vortex and the splitting and this and that. And I asked this person, well, what happens if it splits and ends up in China? And that person said, no, that wouldn't matter. And I'm like, why wouldn't it matter? Well, we find out why it matters. And why it matters is that, well, it forces all your high latitude blocking potential, all your storm potential over towards Asia, and we miss out on everything. We just get the zonal pattern, which is essentially what's happening now. If it isn't going to snow, come on 60s so I can get working on my spring outdoor activities. I got spring fever. Or you can go golfing, or we got baseball, we got football, of course, Super Bowl. And then we got the spring football, so that's something as well. So yeah, I get it, I understand. I mean, I around this time of year, let's say about Valentine's Day, right about that point, people hit their breaking point in terms of winter, and then they're just ready for spring. So I guess a lot of people are going to be happy about that. But I would not be surprised if March is kind of more like a February in terms of a lot of 40s and 50s and rain, the way that things are shaping up. I know that gaps and weaknesses in the magnetic field has been happening. Yes, that is true. Has there been any study about the impacts of that on the stratosphere, in particular places where the weaknesses and gaps occur in the orientation of the vortex? I know that there are studies that are starting because of certain features that are going on with the core of the Earth and whether or not that impacts not only the Earth's tectonic plates, but also the movement of ocean currents, which in turn influences air currents and then the atmosphere as a whole. The stratosphere is a little bit too far up, but then you could talk about the gravity waves and influence interaction with the sun. But there's a lot of preliminary stuff. There's nothing really like that you could really sink your teeth into and really say, okay, here is the data. You got like a lot of computer models, a lot of theories floating around out there, but nothing really proven. What is interesting is that right now we are seeing hard data starting to get collected, and I think we're going to be learning a lot. Just be patient. It's going to take time to get this data, study it, work out what's evolving here, what's true, what isn't. So we're probably about maybe a decade out from actually learning what's happening now and how that actually impacts the Earth's atmosphere. But there's a lot of interesting research that is starting, a lot of gifted young scientists out there who are starting to dive into some of this data, far smarter than me. So it'll be interesting to see what evolves and what new laws we learn about the atmosphere and the pattern overall. Let's see here. Let's look at the persistence of the strong 250 millibar jet streak in the Western Pacific, and it's stretching back and forth towards the west coast. Strong sign that the vortex is displaced in the wrong way. Let's take a look at that. At 250 millibars. Yep, you can see that right here. Now, look at this. When we go over Asia here, you can see this setup here very nicely here, where you got plenty of storm interaction. You have your cold air in play. Your storms are able to march right across here. If we take a look at the temperatures at 850 millibars, you can see the setup here where you have plenty of Arctic air to work with over Asia, and you get this interaction with these storms here, plenty of potential for snow over Asia. But then you see that same scenario here over North America, and you can see it's displaced further north, and you lose your potential for that storm interaction. It's really all back over Asia and Europe. And Europe is setting up to be rather chilly. So Italy, a lot of Eastern Europe, unfortunately around Yugoslavia, and just a real mess. But notice, zoom in here, see the interaction of some of these storms. All your cold air is locked up here in northern Canada and Greenland. And we're just not seeing that interaction setting up for North America. I have basically accepted that we are getting 72, 73. Little or no snow, hoping we don't have bad, severe weather in the spring and cool summer. Yeah, I mean, I'm watching to see how El Nino develops. I'm starting to get the feeling that at the very least the start of this El Nino is going to be more east-based, which typically leads to a very progressive pattern for the eastern United States. Potential for severe weather, absolutely. But I'm not sure whether it's going to be as cool as if we had a west-based El Nino. Let's see. Nice, persistent 250 millibar heights right over the North Pole. It would not surprise me if we end up paying for this almost snowless winter by getting slammed with snow next winter. James, that's a great point. I think that if we see an evolution in our weather pattern where we get an El Nino next year that's more west-based, I would not be surprised if we end up with that. Can't get any less snowy, that's for sure. Since this winter is a total basket case, here's a fun question. Theoretically, what do you think is the upper limit of snowfall from Miller A nor'easter if this pattern was perfect? If the pattern was perfect, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a 30-inch snowfall. That'd be my upper edge. Because then you'd have the high latitude blocking setting up perfectly, displacement of the polar vortex, an active subtropical jet stream, all that would be in play. I assume a 7-foot blizzard will, like what hit the Buffalo Southdowns, could never happen here. But with all the anomalies from climate change, I'm starting to wonder. Okay, here's the thing. The only way you end up with a snowfall like what you saw in Buffalo is with lake enhancement and with lake effect snow. In theory, where could that... Okay. In theory, this is the theoretical. I'm not saying it would ever happen. But in theory, if you get an Arctic air mass and a low pressure system set up to the southeast of Long Island, and you get a fetch coming off the Long Island Sound, the northeastern portion of Long Island would end up with a scenario much like what you would saw in Buffalo. But what you would need is a low pressure system stalled out to the southeast of Block Island for at least 2 days. And you would need an Arctic air mass that would feature high temperatures in the mid to upper teens. But in theory, that's how you would pull that off. Wouldn't work out anywhere else. Except maybe Cape May. But that'd be very difficult to pull off. Let's check out YouTube and see what questions we have here. Wow, we are really busy.
Including duck season, rabbit season going on there.
Let's go Chiefs, go Eagles, go Chiefs, go Eagles.
Duck season, rabbit season.
When is the big snow? Next year. As far as I could see. Could cold air aloft lead to a bit of snow near Philadelphia from this upcoming storm? Okay. If we got strong enough lifting around midnight, you could see a little snow mix in with the rain, but it wouldn't accumulate because you would have surface temperatures between 35 and 37 degrees. But in theory, yes, you could see snow mix in and a little bit of sleet. Are there any years with similar patterns to this one, or are we entering a new frontier with this weather? No, Judy, we've seen this before. We saw this in 2006. We saw this in 1972-73. I want to say sometime in the 80s. I forgot, was it 83, 84? I don't remember off the top of my head. But we also had winters like this in the 50s and 40s. What makes this pattern stand out a little bit more is that, yes, we are warmer overall than those time periods by a degree or two in terms of our winter temperatures, which makes a difference when you're on the coastal plain and a lot of your snowstorms are based on where your surface temperatures are between 30 and 32. If you bump that up to 33 to 35, not only with just large-scale climate change, but also with your urban heat island effect, it does impact your potential for winter storms and the potential for snow accumulation. On the other hand, though, with an enhanced urban heat island effect, which is the heat from your cities, it leads to more convective precipitation. So what we've been seeing in winter storms when we have them is that we get these bands of intense snowfall that we haven't seen before because of the latent heat effect, which is basically thunderstorms within a snowstorm, which on one hand leads to enhanced snowfall and 30-inch snowfall events, but on the other hand leads to these very tight gradients where the town over gets next to nothing, which makes the forecasting of these winter storms far more difficult, far more of a challenge. I remember some boring winters, but this one has been pretty bad. Missed the anticipation and excitement the night before a decent snowstorm. I agree. I definitely agree with that. How many degrees above normal will January be? I've been hearing preliminary around 2 to 3. I have to check that out. Let's see. More go Eagles. Go Chiefs. Better luck next year. Let's see here. Forgot what is more favorable for cold and snow in the mid-Atlantic, El Nino or La Nina. Neither if they're strong. If you have a weak El Nino or weak La Nina, they're both generally favorable. If the strength is west-based for La Nina, should I say El Nino, or east-based for La Nina, that's also more favorable. Here's the basic rule. If you have convection around the date line, that's a favorable season for snowfall. If you don't have convection around the date line, then you won't have a favorable season for snowfall. This year, we start out with convection around the date line, but as we moved on through past really after late December, we lost the convection around the date line, which has thrown the whole pattern off kilter. Which, again, we go back to that fateful time period right before Christmas that we were moving in the right direction and then everything went off the rails. What if the upper level low moves further north? If this would result in a strengthening further north, could this result in more mixing? The problem here is that the overall pattern won't allow the upper level low to move further north because of the position of the subtropical jet stream and the polar jet stream. They're not interacting. They're not playing nice. So as a result, your upper level low is going to be forced to the south. It's really pushing the bounds of how far north it can go. And there's literally no data whatsoever supporting any further northern track of the upper level low. Do you think we get a lot of severe thunderstorms in the spring, summer? I have no idea yet. No idea yet. Typically, in El Niños, you see more severe thunderstorm outbreaks in the mid-Atlantic, but we don't know yet how fast El Niño will develop and the orientation. There's a lot of uncertainty in that factor, but I will be studying it. I think for spring we have a neutral ENSO season, which features a progressive polar jet stream and fast-moving cold fronts, but I don't see any signal that would suggest any widespread severe weather outbreaks in the spring for us, for the northern Mid-Atlantic. Southern Plains is a different story. Whether that continues into the summer, I don't know yet. I don't have enough data yet. Do you think winter 2023-24 will be snowless? Oh my God! Let's get through the summer. Let's get to the summer. Because if we've learned one thing, is that a seasonal forecast in October can go off the rails pretty easily. Forget a year out. Anyone that tells you they know what to expect in 2023-24 winter is pulling your leg and taking your money. I have no idea. There are so many factors involved in that forecast that I have no idea. On the other hand, it can't get any less snowy. So there's got to be, you would think that next year would feature more snow potential because we literally have had none since mid-December. So it can't get any worse. I remember Cape May getting Bay Effect snow a few times during some deep northwest flows. Yes, absolutely. I've actually seen that myself. 2000, 2003, yes. Where did I miss Central New Jersey getting anything over the weekend? Rain? We're getting rain. We're getting a lot of rain. Getting about half an inch of rain. All right. Some good questions out there. I'll see. Something like that. I remember I also wasn't long after getting slammed snowy winters. I remember that. Basically, the difference between no snow and a snowy winter was about 4 hours back in December. Yeah. It's kind of funny, right? I mean, that's the one thing that I love about this science is that sometimes it comes down to literally very small details of hours. Which is hard to accept when you are a snowplow business or you have any type of business that is connected to the weather. You can't understand. And I understand the frustration of saying, what do you mean 4 hours? This was a forecast for the season. I prepared for this and it didn't happen. And I get it. I get it. And this is why when I put out the winter forecast, I always list, okay, these are the factors that if they go wrong would nuke this forecast, would basically kill this forecast and limit the ability for the forecast to verify. The reason why I do that is because I recognize my own limitations. And that as much as I would like to be right every year, I'm not. I can't be. And if I was, I probably would not be doing this live chat. I'd probably be locked up in some government facility being studied. So because of that, if you recognize your limitations and recognize what you can and can't do for forecasting, and give people that heads up, saying, okay, if these things happen, then it won't pan out the way I'm seeing things. That'd be my best way of preparing those individuals for winters like this. But at the same time, it's hard to explain sometimes. So yes, in my opinion, some might disagree, but in my opinion, this winter basically came down to what happened in mid-December. If we had lined up with that storm setting up on the East Coast in mid-December, this forecast would have been far different. This weather pattern would have been far different. Unless someone is planning to blow up their own secret volcano lair or launch some nukes, I don't think anyone can forecast next winter yet. Oh, I know some people will try. I know some people on YouTube already are. I think even people who went with straight it's La Nina forecast got total lack of snow right. I honestly didn't think that the way that this pattern set, because when I looked at La Nina, it was east base and generally on the weak side. And what really threw off the pattern wasn't necessarily La Nina, but the strong thermal gradient that set up over the Pacific between La Nina and the warm northern Pacific. And that led to that powerful jet streak, which is more El Nino than anything else. What happened in early January with that strong jet streak is what happens when you have a strong El Nino. So it's been a very weird year. Let's see here. Let's see. YouTube looks good. January was basically strong El Nino, 250 millibar pattern. Yes, exactly. And that part to me was the shocking part of this winter. When I saw that jet streak, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Of all the features I thought that we'd see this winter, maybe a raging southeast ridge or something like that where I got that wrong. I, for the life of me, never thought I would have seen this winter a powerful jet stream from China into California. If this was an El Nino, I would expect that. But La Nina, you typically don't get that. You typically, what you end up is a weaker subtropical jet stream, which would not support that type of scenario, and your polar jet stream would be stronger, and it would feature a stronger Aleutian low and a powerful ridge over Western Canada. And then you'd end up with that southeast ridge either displaced over the Gulf Coast or the Bahamas. But I never thought I would have seen that jet streak, which is really unusual to see during a La Nina season. But weather has a way of screwing with you. It's like we got the worst of El Nino and La Nina at the same time. Exactly. That's literally it. We literally got the worst potential influences of an El Nino and La Nina in this winter. El Nino in late January and La Nina in February. Any update on the water vapor or other impacts of the volcano? So far, the expansion of the water vapor that we were talking about in the fall has started to reach portions of the northern hemisphere 10 and 30 millibar level. We should see a rapid cooling because of that as we get into the spring months, and that should lead to a little bit more disruption in the circulation. We'll probably see that in the QBO. I'm not sure how much of a disruption, there's still most of that concentration is mostly focused over the southern hemisphere in the mid latitudes. And I'm not really seeing anything of the same magnitude showing up in the northern hemisphere. But there's a lot of debate in terms of the QBO, which is your stratospheric winds at 30 millibars and 50 millibars, and how that's going to be different than what we normally expect in the summer, and how that will impact the head leaf cells. But there's still a lot of disagreement on how that's all going to work out. But so far, we've seen an expansion, but clearly the strongest influence remains over the southern hemisphere. And looks like we're doing pretty good. It's already 8:40, not bad. Let's see if we got anything new with the observations out here. Our rainfall is pushing into the Ohio River Valley. That's setting up pretty nicely. Let's see if we have anything new with the NAM. We'll update that. Nothing really new here. So we got a warm front lifting through with showers. Take the HRR guidance. Yeah, that's setting up pretty good. Notice, again, your strongest liftings over the eastern Great Lakes on the HRR guidance. We'll get a few passing showers, but we miss out the bulk of the lifting here, which matches up nicely with what you're seeing on the water vapor satellite picture and on the latest infrared satellite picture. And here's a cool way to know how the lifting's setting up. This is a clear signal of convection, so our thunderstorm line. Some pretty good severe thunderstorms down here in the Gulf Coast. Here's our upper level low, a nice conveyor belt, and then here's our warm front leaf right here. So you got your cold air coming in, moist air coming in, warm conveyor belt. So our storm continues to evolve. SPC has enhanced risk, severe risk for the Gulf Coast today, and pretty nasty tornado risk. Yeah, it's pretty nasty down there. Let's go down and take a look at our storms here. As you can see, we have some tornado warnings popping up here. Just waiting for the radar reload. There we go. We have a lot of that one. So let's zoom in on that. Let's see if we can zoom in on this. Nice tornado cell right here. We have a lot of vertical wind shear setting up over the Gulf Coast here. Some pretty nasty storms. What typically you have in this type of scenario is that your tornado cells are well out ahead of your cold front, and then your main line is back here. And the reason why is because your strongest vertical wind shear is going to be out ahead of your main line. So we're seeing our tornadoes setting up here. That should start to subside as the main line catches up to some of these thunderstorms out ahead. And it's going to be a very nasty evening and overnight hours along the Gulf Coast, unfortunately, with this cold front moving through. We're getting closer to spring, and as a result, we're getting more of that influence. And then, of course, we have our warm front lifting up towards the northern mid-Atlantic. Well, I think that pretty much covers all the questions for tonight. If we have any more, please send them in. Other than that, I think we'll be shutting it down. A few notes for tomorrow. There won't be any videos tomorrow morning. I will, of course, have updates, but no video chat tomorrow or video discussions. They will be back on Friday, though, so definitely they will be back. But in the meantime, I will have text updates tomorrow morning to cover everything. And let's see, I think we have all the questions in here tonight. I think we've covered everything. Everything's covered on YouTube. Okay, so we'll call it a night for tonight. So again, the overall theme is, yes, we have a rainstorm on the way. No snow, but certainly some rain. High potential for some of that heavier rain, possibly mixing with a little bit of sleet and snow. No accumulation around midnight on Sunday, but that's pretty much about it. We'll continue to keep an eye on our upper level lows, see if there's any shenanigans that develop out of it, but I doubt it. And our overall pattern again points towards winter weather towards China and Russia, but not so much around here. We'll keep an eye on March, but I wouldn't really put any bets on that. That is your discussion for tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining and, of course, following along and asking outstanding questions. I will see you next week. And as always, stay safe out there.